Crisis in Calais. Thousands of migrants are trying to break out of France and get into the UK any way they can. As the French and British governments argue over who's responsible, is there a viable long-term solution? This is Inside Story. Hello there, welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clark. It's known as the Jungle, a crowded makeshift camp housing thousands of migrants. It is close to the French entrance of the Channel Tunnel near the port of Calais. Some migrants are seeking asylum in France. Others are breaking down fences and storming the Eurotunnel rail terminal, jumping onto trains and trucks bound for Britain. It is a desperate journey with everything on the line. Some have already died trying. For the French and British governments, the immigration issue is causing endless headaches and debate. Nightly incursions by migrants, coupled with road blockades by striking ferry staff, have led to British haulage firms facing million-dollar losses and rising. All right, let's take a closer look at the figures. About 3,000 migrants, mostly from Sudan, Eritrea and Ethiopia, live in those makeshift camps. British and French police say together they've stopped almost 40,000 attempts to illegally cross the channel in the past year. That's more than double the number of attempts prevented in the previous 12 months. An extra 120 French officers have been sent to Calais. Almost 20,000 undocumented migrants have been arrested near Calais this year alone. Well, our reporter Charles Stratford has been meeting migrants who've so far tried and failed to illegally reach the UK through the Channel Tunnel.
Ahmed insists we hide his identity. He has 7 children and a wife in Afghanistan. It's taken him 4 months to travel across Western Asia and Europe. He says he is determined to make it to the UK.
We want to asylum there in UK to make our life easily, to bring our family. If the situation is good, for example, if the situation is better, so we want to go back to our country.
Many of the people living in this camp seem to be genuine asylum seekers fleeing political persecution and conflict in their respective countries. And they say the reason why they want to live in the UK is because they want to be in an English language speaking country where getting refugee status is easier than it is in France. Britain and France are being criticised for not doing enough to address real asylum claims.
So the UK need to look closely at who wants to ask for asylum, maybe take those people in England, look at their request. If they don't fit the bill, then yes, send them back to wherever. I mean, I don't know, make a decision. And France need to do the same thing. If today you decide to ask for asylum in France because you're tired of trying and not succeeding to go to the UK, your first appointment to register your asylum request is in November.
Of course, there are many people here wanting a better job, a better life in the UK, so-called economic migrants. They say it's easier to find work in the UK than in France. The UK government has offered France help with security, but says all Europe should help find a solution. Local officials in Calais totally disagree.
This is totally a British problem. What they don't understand is that everyone in Europe sees it as their problem. They can't keep sending security to France as if Calais is a suburb of the UK. We're not England, and we never will be.
Near the tunnel entrance, the fence is being repaired yet again. It had been cut by men prepared to try and grab onto a passing train, prepared to risk their lives for a life in Britain. Ahmed says he will do the same.
All right, let's now bring in our guests. From the heart of the migrant camps in Calais, we have Maya Conforti. She's from l'Auberge des Migrants, a local migrant charity. James Hookham is the Deputy Chief Executive of Britain's Freight Transport Association. He's in Tunbridge Wells in South East England. And also in Britain, in Durham, in fact, is Tom Brooks, a specialist in immigration policy and Professor of Law and Government at Durham University. Welcome to you all. Mayor, if I may start with you. As I say, you're right there in the heart of the camp. We can see migrants behind you. Tell us more about what the situation is like there in the jungle.
Well, we have about 2,500 refugees who are here in the jungle, and as some of you know, it's not a camp, but it's a jungle. It's very, very difficult living conditions, and 2/3 of the people who are living in these camps are, legitimate candidates for asylum seeking in the UK, and are having difficulty understanding why nobody lets them through, and why they still have to risk their lives in order to get to the UK.
Give us a sense, Mayor, of the desperation of these people. What kind of things do they say to you?
Well, we cannot say that they are desperate. They are eager. They are hopeful. They are people who have much energy. You realize they left conditions in their countries that were basically life or death threats or dictature. I mean, just really horrendous conditions. They spend months traveling from Africa or as far as Afghanistan and Syria in horrible conditions. They risk their lives many times. They've seen many of their close ones die, either at home or on the road. And they arrive here and they have a difficulty realizing that they are in France living in a jungle with living conditions that are below international refugee camp standards. And they also cannot understand and having a hard time coping with the idea that there is this huge border between France and the UK. For them, Europe is Europe. How come there's these big fences which are getting higher and higher and more numerous and longer as the weeks go by? We've seen that this last couple of months. And so forcing them to risk their lives more and more.
Okay, well, we'll get on to the what can be done about it potentially in a little while. But James Hookham, first of all, let's talk about the knock-on impacts as well as the humanitarian aspects. I'm sure you're very concerned about what's happening to trade. A huge amount of trade goes via the Channel Tunnel. Tell us about the impact on freight.
Well, there's about £90 billion of UK trade goes through Calais in the port of Calais in a given year. It's a vital trade route for exports from Britain onto the continent, and also the UK imports a lot of its materials and needs from manufacturers and providers across Europe and indeed across parts of Asia as well, and that enters the country either through the Channel Tunnel or on the ferries crossing from Calais. So what is happening is that as vehicles approach the port of Calais, drivers find that their vehicles are surrounded by migrants who, as you've described, are desperate to get into the UK and therefore take to breaking into slow-moving vehicles that are queuing to enter the port and stowing away in the backs of the vehicles in the trailers, spoiling the load, damaging the vehicle, and also rendering the driver to a £2,000 fine for every immigrant that they find.
What is the process of spoiling the load? What do you mean by that?
Well, a lot of the produce that is coming into the country is fresh food. It's salad crops from parts of Europe, indeed from France. And the food hygiene regulations in the UK are very strict, and they're very strictly enforced, so that if a vehicle has been entered by migrants, the load is condemned, it is written off, it will not be fit for human consumption because of the interference with the load, because of the spoiling of the cargo, and that's a considerable cost and disruption to the supply chains.
Is it possible to quantify the type of costs that we're talking about, James?
Well, yes, the cost of some loads runs into many millions of pounds. We had one operator who was a distributor of pharmaceuticals that was invaded by migrants, and the cost was over £2 million. And that was vital therapeutic drugs destined for the National Health Service in the United Kingdom. Other loads of fresh produce are several £1,000s. Then there's the damage to the vehicle. And the other thing I have to say is that sometimes migrants are even threatening drivers and attempting to do damage to them as well. So this is a very difficult situation for drivers of vehicles who are simply going about their lawful and legitimate business.
All right, let's go north of you there in Kent to Durham and to Tom Brooks. Tom, both sides of this particular argument, France and Britain, say it's the other country's fault, but the truth is that this is the tip of a very large problem which emanates all the way down south to the country of Libya and others.
It certainly does. I mean, one of the things that we've seen with this problem, this crisis, is that it's a crisis that just keeps getting worse. I mean, the problem in Calais, the jungle didn't start yesterday or last month or 2 months before that. People have been talking about a crisis in Calais since at least September of last year, and many have even longer than that. What tends to happen is that Britain and France engage in a game of pointing fingers at each other, putting responsibility on blaming the other for the problems that happen. They do a little too little, a little too late, just to calm things for the moment in the short term. But then the problem erupts again because, as you say, there's a lot of pressure, a lot of people trying to come into Europe, making their way across to Calais. That is a wider problem that I don't think the French and British governments really have come to grips with.
Mayor, can I throw it to you? This is a wider problem. It's not just a question of the British and the French governments throwing blame at one another. It is actually a Europe-wide problem that has to be dealt with at the EU level.
Yes, absolutely, and probably even more so than in Europe. You know, it's the whole world. It's a problem that starts right in those people's countries. You know, and the Western world has had a foot in those countries and created problems, and did some good things and some bad things, to be fair. And now those people want to come here because their countries have gone into terrible conditions. So, and international laws say that these people have a right to be here, if they are refugees. And we also need to realize that this is not an invasion. It's only 150 or 200,000 people who come in a country of 500 million, in a continent of 500 million people. It's the same thing with England. I mean, when we have 5,000 people arriving in Lampedusa or Sicily, we expect about 5 or 6% of them arriving in Calais a week later. So it's a very small portion that wants to go to the UK, and many of those ask for asylum in France too. I think the laws need to be changed. The European laws need to be changed. Each country needs to agree on all the countries need to agree on immigration laws that will be fair for each country, depending on the wealth of the country or the population of the country. And we also need to stop being so afraid of what is happening. This is not an invasion, as the media like to relay it, or the politicians like to relay it. It's only a small percentage, and invasion, means malintent. These people are not coming to sting you or to hurt you.
But
or
isn't the problem, Mayor? Forgive me for interrupting. Isn't the problem the fact that the line is blurred between those who do have the right to be there, as you put it, and those who are just, looking for a better way of life?
Well, everybody wants a better way of life. Don't you think there's British people who want a better way of life? So even in a sense, wanting a better way of life is okay. When a British or a French person goes to China because she can get a good job and get well paid.
But that's a very different story to somebody fleeing a war zone, isn't it?
Who works in Shanghai. Yes, but she has the right to go to China and work in China.
Okay, let me take it to you. Throw it to you there.
Yes.
Okay, I think you've made an important point, because it's not as if Europe or indeed Britain is closed to asylum seekers or indeed to immigration, but there is a process, and in fact there is a very well regulated process. Yes. There are European agreements in place, and there are procedures that can be followed. What is difficult for British businesses to understand, and certainly members of my association, is that there doesn't appear to be any application of those processes and procedures within the territory of France, because we have many thousands of people arriving at Calais and nobody can tell the British government where they've come from and how they got there. The arrangements are in place at European level. There is something called the Dublin Agreement, and so there are procedures that are in place that indeed other member states do implement. And I have to say, I have not had an explanation by the French government as to why they seem to be unable to implement it in Calais, because we don't get this problem at other Western European ports, for example at Zeebrugge.
May I just give you 30 seconds to come back on that?
Yes. Okay. So the Schengen space is here. The United Kingdom is not part of the Schengen space. That's why we have those fences. If you look at a country, let's say like France and Belgium, which has nowadays no borders, there's a natural balance that's happened between the asylum seekers in Belgium and those in France. Everybody has, refugees make a decision as to where they want to ask for asylum depending on, many factors. Here they cannot some of them make the choice of going to the UK, and the UK does not want to look at their processes unless they've crossed illegally. Why doesn't, since the UK border is in Calais, why doesn't the UK does some of a pre-sorting of what it deems a legitimate candidate to asylum, and then takes those people to England and avoids, little 3-year-old children to be taken across barbed wires.
Okay, let's bring in Tom Brooks. Tom, this targeting of the UK by the migrants, why is it that Britain is so tempting for them? Is it as perceived that the UK is a soft touch on migrants?
Well, you have various reports about what are the motivations for people wanting to come to the UK. I think a very big one that is most commonly reported is people speak English. So people find themselves in France, or they find themselves in Germany, and it must be said that far more asylum seekers are accepted in Germany and in Sweden and other parts of the EU than Britain. But the English language is a very powerful attraction for a lot of people. And I dare say another powerful attraction is that Britain is the heart of the Commonwealth. So a lot of folks are fleeing from places that have some connection to the Commonwealth, or part of the Commonwealth, and that also attracts them. If I can just comment very briefly on a couple points made. I agree with many of the things the other commentators have said. There is something strange about the border. So people being processed into the UK, it's happening in Calais. Part of the justification for that was an agreement between France and Britain. So people entering France through the Eurotunnel enter that on the British side, and those entering Britain from France enter on the French side. So that's an agreement made by France and the UK. But I think that there are some issues about this Dublin Agreement issue that were made. You have a lot of people coming into the European Union for asylum or for other reasons. There's an agreement among this Dublin Agreement is an agreement that says that where people are coming to claim asylum, they ought to be having their claims heard at the first country in Europe, first safe country that they arrive in. That's clearly not happening. There's several reasons for it, and one reason might be the incentives need to change. So there's no real incentive. So people might be able to break into the border through illegal human trafficking, risking themselves and so on, one way or another. But once they're in that country doesn't have the real incentive to try to find these people out and hear their claims. Instead, there's an incentive to let them go somewhere else, because otherwise they might then be responsible for handling that claim and the costs that might be associated with it. So I think that there must be greater cooperation between France and Britain just to start things off, to do something about the jungle. The jungle is in no one's interest. It's not in the migrants' interest, it's not in the French interest, it's not in the British interest, not in the interest of business of both countries, and so on.
Right, let me bring in James Hookham. Let me bring in James Hookham.
James, Union level issue as well.
Forgive the delay here. It's making matters a little complicated as we try to get through to all of you. But James, do you think Britain should be doing more to take the pressure off France?
I think the British government has offered a lot of support and indeed money to help secure the infrastructure in Calais. And I do know that our government is working closely with its French counterparts on two levels. First of all, there is very strong evidence that there is organised criminal activity and people trafficking behind a lot of the flow of migrants. And I know that criminal investigation agencies in both Britain and France are working very closely together to try to tackle that. But the other thing that Britain and France are doing, together with their other European partners, is, as several of other commentators have said, is to go back to source and try to offer help and support at the original causes of why people are wanting to leave their home countries and move across Europe in these sorts of numbers. And I know that Britain and France in particular have strong allegiances and alliances in working in West Africa, in French-speaking West Africa, and also in North Africa. So I know that there's a lot of work that is going on in the background.
Right, the trouble is with that, it's a long way down the line, and this is an immediate problem, isn't it? May I suggest to you this concept that has been brought up by many people and many commentators, that perhaps Sangatte, the refugee camp that was dismantled back in 2002, should be rebuilt, and there should be another establishment to house these migrants as they come into Calais. A question for you, Mayor.
You know, mostly we need to solve the problem of the border. You know, I mean, these people are here, they live in horrible conditions, but mostly they're here because they cannot go to the UK. This is what we need to solve, is how to resolve the problem of people who want to go to the UK and for the ones who have legitimate rights to go. And also we need to stop accusing them of causing all those traffic jams. You know, traffic jams happen because the economies in Europe are doing good, and so there's many trucks. The traffic jams do not start because of the migrants. They start and then the migrants take advantage of them. Obviously, I empathize with the destruction of the goods in the trucks. That's really not good. But we need to come to some way to people circulate more freely between borders. I mean, you can move any goods from any country to any country in the world. How come human beings cannot move more freely? Within reason, obviously.
Tom Brooks, final word to you. Isn't perhaps one of the reasons why so many people are struggling to come up with a solution for this is that there simply isn't one beyond going back, as James has been talking about, to the very source of the problem?
Well, I think there is something to be said for going to the source of the problem. Of course, in having further connections in other countries then builds new relationships that might be a further attraction to people coming to the UK and places that are involved. But I think that it's more than just kind of going to the source. I think that the problems that we're seeing right now in Calais are a wider problem than just the issues of France and Britain, who in a sense are as the problems are kind of growing in that part of the world, they've been kind of very high tensions, bigger numbers in other parts of the European Union, and where those other parts of Europe have asked for support and help and some kind of quota system to distribute asylum seekers and so on, that's fallen largely on deaf ears in Britain and France. And I think that now that France and Britain has a problem, I think that the other countries will say, well, you know, welcome aboard. I mean, what they really need to do is come to some agreement, not just to solve the temporary problem of the Calais crisis and the things that May is seeing now on the ground and what James is seeing with his colleagues, but I think they need to have a long-term vision for securing the borders of Europe, improving the asylum seeker structure, and because the continuing crisis is in no one's interest.
And a continuing crisis it certainly is. That is all we have time for in this discussion, but we do appreciate your participation. Mayor Conforti in Calais, in Tunbridge Wells, James Hookham, and up there in Durham, Tom Brooks. Thank you very much indeed for participating in this discussion. And thank you for watching. We are, of course, always keen to hear from you. Just get in touch via our programme page at aljazeera.com, or you can post your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or just tweet us using @AJ Inside Story. From me, Nick Clark, and the rest of the team, it's goodbye for now.